We've invited Matt Vallière, who is the Executive Director of the Patients' Rights Action Fund, a national, secular, nonpartisan leader defending the rights of patients, people with disabilities, our elders, and the poor from the threat of legalized assisted suicide. PRAF is a 501c4 not-for-profit corporation. He's owned and managed various private businesses and worked both professionally and voluntarily for nonprofit causes. Most currently with PRAF since 2014. He proudly serves as a volunteer emergency medical services first responder. As an experienced caregiver to people with life-threatening disabilities, Mr. Vallière is a tireless advocate for the rights of patients and people with disabilities. Both the medical setting and the public square. He's been published in the media outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Hill, Real Clear Politics, Newsweek, and many others. Would you welcome Mr. Vallière? Matt Vallière. I'll get the crowd out of here.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Thank you so much for having me. Jason, thanks for a nice welcome and for inviting me to speak. Jason and I work together in a coalition here in New York State to oppose the legalization of assisted suicide laws. I work for a nonpartisan organization. I am not actually conservative, so don't shoot yet. I know you all have Second Amendment people, which is great. So because I come from a nonpartisan organization, we don't have a position on many other issues. As a matter of fact, we concentrate almost predominantly on this issue. And we do that because this issue doesn't cut down the regular lines. It's not right, left. It's not secular versus religious. This is a human being issue. I'm going to bring up one other little nonpartisan issue right now, is the use of technology. So if anyone wants to think about how technology affects us, and right or left, it doesn't matter. We just had a big hearing on Capitol Hill about this. If anyone wants to think about a life and death issue right now, just put your telephones down just for a second. Close your laptops for just a second. And think about an issue that literally means life and death for you and your family. So, why is it you're saying to yourself, well, first of all, we're pretty sure the party's opposed to these public policies. Yes, you are. I read it on your website. Good job. Way to go. I'm going to ask two questions. First, the question is, well, why is it that some liberals and some progressives are also opposed to assisted suicide laws? Then I'm going to ask a second question, why is it that you all are opposed to assisted suicide laws? Okay, so the first answer is easier for me. People to the left of center see assisted suicide laws as a danger to vulnerable people and a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, so those two things. Why is that the case? So, how do assisted suicide laws work? Right now, can you kill yourself with impunity in New York? Yes, you can. No one's gonna put you or your family, no negative impact if you attempt or actually succeed in killing yourself in New York. What do these laws do? They make suicide a medical treatment that's prescribed by your doctor, filled by your pharmacist. You go down to CVS, you pick up the drugs, you go home, and you kill yourself. Sometimes even paid for by your insurer. So you got for-profit big insurance and government providers saving money by denying people coverage for real care, while at the same time making assisted suicide extremely easy to get, extremely quick to get, and they'll pay for it. They'll pay for it. So here you have, if you kind of like you do an out-of-body experience for a moment and think of yourself as a progressive, and you're like, okay, so what about the little guy, and how's this going to affect people who have not? How is it that these forces are going to shovel people and funnel people into one choice, and that's death by doctor, by having a broken, profit-driven healthcare system, from their view, okay? And seeing that broken system deny people in various ways equal access to the healthcare that's available today. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the people on the Upper East Side have a little better access to, say, like Memorial Sloan Kettering than, say, somebody who's, I don't know, across the river, okay? So in a system that already puts some people at a disadvantage, whether that be because of their socioeconomic status, and in some people's view, their color, et cetera, you add assisted suicide laws to the mix, and all of a sudden, now it's life and death. It's not only you don't get as good of care, the system is trying to save money by giving you really only one choice. And if you're ultra autonomy focused, you're saying to yourself, that's not actually autonomy. Autonomy presupposes that one has a set of choices and that you're empowered to make them. If you don't have that, there's no autonomy. There's no actual choice involved. And so that's where you can see that from a progressive point of view, some people may be able to come to the conclusion, yikes, this could really hurt vulnerable people. This could put some people who have not in a position where the only thing they have equal access to is getting lethal drugs from their doctor to end their pain and suffering, to stop themselves from putting their families into crushing debt, or from dying a horrible death. Like, if those are your three choices, and the other choice is I kill myself with ease from a doctor, I think you might go for it, right? Like a lot of people would. And especially if you're demoralized by a system that you've been fighting and having a hard time getting your care, and now you're like, look, I just can't take it anymore, I need a way out. Okay, so with assisted suicide laws, the way they work is that you have to have, in order to get a doctor's help in killing yourself, you need to have a 6-month or less prognosis. That means you have a condition that in that doctor's estimation, you will die in 6 months. Okay, so that can mean with care, you get the top quality care, you get metastatic stage 4 cancer, you're going out, okay? Nobody's gonna be able to help you from that. It also might mean you're a diabetic, like my dad. And he, in a dark moment, decides he's going to forego care. He's going to get off his insulin. Now he has 6 months or less to live, and he can purposefully do that in order to exercise his right as a patient to forego care and get a doctor to write him a script for lethal drugs. It can also mean somebody like the anorexia patient. Young woman with anorexia, she's an adult. This doctor says, oh, your case happens to be hopeless. There's no helping you. You are going to die of starvation in the next 6 months. So why don't I just give you a hand with that? It'll be a lot less painful. And there are doctors in the United States of America who have written lethal prescriptions to young people with anorexia as their underlying condition of 6 months less. So most people are thinking to themselves like, oh, when you have assisted suicide, it's like older people dying in excruciating pain in the last few weeks of their life. This is the farce of the pro-suicide lobby. Now you're also thinking to yourself, well, the pro-suicide lobby must be liberals, right? There's a certain amount of truth to the majority of people who support this are left of center. But there are plenty who are right of center who support it, vote for it, and in fact, co-sponsor the bills. And that's where you all come in. You can stop that from happening, because you have a certain amount of power among those who are right of center, even if they're just right of center because of their, say, they're fiscally conservative, something like that. They don't really care about these other issues. You can help that. And so the other question was, let me finish that train of thought. So if it's 6 months or less, so now you get 6 months or less, your doctor says you have that prognosis, You have to get that checked by another doctor. Then the first doctor can write you a script. You go, take your script, you go down to CVS, you get the drugs, you go home. Zero oversight. Okay, so this is one of the, I'm going to segue now from why is it that progressives are opposed when they are opposed. It's because that 6 months or less, no matter what condition causes that, it is a disability. Disability is a protected class thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'm telling you, I know that this might hurt a little bit, but the ADA, as those who are pro-business, would love to hate it because it sometimes causes heartburn for businesses and for people in construction and all the costs. But it is the main difference between us and other developed nations in how we treat people and whether or not we treat some people differently than others based on their health and disability status. And that is, my friends, the difference as to whether or not we are willing to make some people second-class citizens and treat them differently. And those are always the first people to be seen as other and to be seen as collateral damage. Always. And so ask yourselves some questions about whether or not in that view you can see that, yeah, that makes some sense that we would have a public policy in place like the ADA that says, no, 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 you have to treat all people equal, because that resonates with one of your own tenets, which is equal protection under the law. Always. And in every case, no matter what, Constitution. So that's where there's like you could actually go into the State House holding hands. It's not that far away. You could hold hands with a liberal and actually agree with them on something. And Jason does that all the time on this issue. But why does he do that? Okay, so he does that because he holds conservative principles very dear. I also assume, and I'm not gonna make any judgments, but I imagine it's also because of his Christian faith. You all may be Christians. You may have a Jewish heritage. And I saw in some of your platform that you care about those Judeo-Christian tenets and protecting that, and that it's under attack. Well, coming at this from a secular perspective, I don't engage in that. In our coalition that Jason and I both work in, we also don't engage in questions about faith. And in fact, I don't even engage in questions, the moral or ethical implications of somebody taking their own life. That's not on the table for the Patients' Rights Action Fund. What is on the table for you, even if you have no faith base, is a few things that I can glean and apply. Okay, so what does a social issue like assisted suicide have to do with conservative principles as such? Not conservative principles because you're Christian or because you're Jewish, because you're observant, but conservative principles as such. So as I said earlier, for-profit insurers and government insurers, which are only increasing, much to your chagrin, I imagine, are using this to save money by pushing some people away from actual care and some people towards suicide. In terms of taxes and spending, the United States Congress, back in the Clinton era, passed a bill known as the Assisted Suicide Funding Restriction Act. It's like Title 10 on crack, but for assisted suicide. It doesn't have to be rehashed out every appropriation cycle. It's a standalone bill that says you cannot use any federal penny for anything in any way related to assisted suicide in whole or in part. Yet, state governments that have passed assisted suicide laws explicitly are ready to save money by passing the bill. So California passed their bill in the context of a special session that needed to come up with a $1 billion shortfall in Medi-Cal, which is their Medicaid program. You cannot bring up bills that are non-germane to the special session. So here you have an assisted suicide bill being passed in the context of saving money. The Canadian single-payer system saves up to $140 million a year and growing by having euthanasia and assisted suicide laws on the books. I know that you're interested in saving the government from paying for a lot of things, but I imagine that you're not interested in doing it in that way, right? And that seems to be contrary to one of the other conservative tenets, which is the preservation of life. And that's a constitutional, that's right there in the Declaration of Independence. And in fact, here in New York, you had a court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court that said, we are ruling against proponents of assisted suicide who want to proclaim that this is in the Constitution, a right to kill yourself with the help of a doctor, because the state of New York has a vested interest in the preservation of life. Now, why is it that conservative principles care about the preservation of life? Because you care about equal protection. I mean, I guess I would hope all Americans do on some level, yeah? Equal protection under law is extremely important to law and order. If you don't have it, there is no law and order. That's where the Americans with Disabilities Act comes in. It forces governments, insurers, and businesses, yes, to treat all people, no matter their disability status, in the same way, and to remove the barriers to access to full participation in the community. If you have a public policy that says, well, let me start that over. If the standard of care, so Jason said I'm a first responder. I am. I volunteer in my little village. You get trained. You call 911 in my town, I might show up at your house. If it's because you're worried about killing yourself, there's a standard of care that immediately clicks into place. And anyone who's in the medical profession will know. If somebody expresses a desire to harm or kill themselves, there's a standard of care. Except in states where assisted suicide is legal. That standard of care is out the window. Not only is the standard of care out the window, so too is how we enforce the law. Generally speaking, if any of us helped somebody else kill themselves, there are repercussions. In Massachusetts, you go to jail. That's where I'm from. I don't know about if you go to jail here, for sure, but I imagine you do. In New York, if a doctor helps somebody kill themselves, not only do they face criminal charges, they would also face your family suing them, and they would lose their license. The medical licensure board would come after them. The professional associations would censure them. Not if that person has 6 months or less to live, and you end up passing assisted suicide laws. Now they're off scot-free. And it binds prosecutors' hands from being able to do anything about a physician who goes off the rails, even if they know about it. Even if the doctors aren't actually obeying the assisted suicide law as written within the guidelines. If they go out of the guidelines, zero repercussions. No one has ever been prosecuted for not filling out the paperwork, for not doing the reporting. And guess who does all the reporting on assisted suicide laws? The participating doctors themselves. It's like you find a parking space in New York City, and they're like, it says no parking on Tuesdays and Thursdays, street sweeping, and no parking on you got to get out a slide rule to park in New York City. And then all of a sudden, you're getting towed away, right? But you don't pay the ticket, and the judge is like, well, you didn't pay your tickets. You said, well, I wasn't gonna, you parked 15 times Well, yeah, but you didn't catch me the other 20 times. I didn't report those. I don't have to pay for those, right? And that's exactly what these assisted suicide laws do. They put all of the power in the hands of doctors. Some of these doctors don't view all lives as worth living. They see some people as expendable, some people as throwawayable, not worth the effort, not worth the healthcare dollars, better off dead. And so from the perspective of the party, I urge you to continue keeping in your platform the opposition to assisted suicide laws explicitly because you hold equal protection under the law so dear. And if you end up with assisted suicide laws here, that equal protection is out the window. And that is honestly one of the interesting other segues over to where you can hold hands with liberals and be in agreement with them. And guess what? I happen to, one of my organizations, so we have a 501c4, Patients' Rights Action Fund, 501c3. We do some non-lobbying work. 501c4 is called, C3 is called the Institute for Patients' Rights. We, with progressive disability rights advocates and organizations, are suing the state of California based on equal protection under the law with a group of liberal lawyers from San Francisco. There can be consensus on this. You here in New York have had registered Democrats voting no in committee on assisted suicide. And so part of the strategy on like the local level is keep everybody in line. Make sure everybody understands what's at stake here, both life and death and the Constitution. Equal protection under the law matters. And so does the enforcement of the law. So the only last thing I want to say before, I know we have a few minutes for questions, is that you mentioned something in the website about the opioid crisis and that's truly concerning. To kind of just like bring it home, the amount of morphine prescribed in a lethal dose, the kind of prevailing cocktail of drugs in assisted suicide, is 1,000 times the therapeutic dose. 1,000 times. So when people are like, oh yeah, we're worried about, opioids, it's like, you legalize this, and all of the like restrictions and care and careful planning around the opioid crisis and being careful with opioids, like there is zero oversight on the assisted suicide drugs, and you're putting 1,000 times the dose on the street for anybody to have access to at any time. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm also here through lunch, and there you go.
All right, so there we go. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Good on both of those? Yep. All right. So quick question. As we talked through a couple of things, one is, can you address the issue of personal autonomy? It seems to be the core argument we hear opposing assisted suicide. And isn't it my right over my body?
So with regard to autonomy, as I mentioned earlier, Jason, you have the situation in which some people actually don't have access to all of the best care. And autonomy has to mean that you have all the various choices and access to it. If the only thing to which you have equal access is assisted suicide, now there's no choice, A. B, there are both subtle, implicit and explicit pressures on people to opt out. So if your family is going to be under all kinds of crushing debt, if you have internalized that you're worth less because you have disabilities or illnesses, and then all of a sudden somebody just makes the suggestion of the possibility, maybe your doctor's just saying like, oh, well look, like this is one of the options for you, if you want to. And now you're feeling the pressure to do it, That doesn't equal autonomy. Also, the proponents love to say this is all about pain, physical pain. Physical pain does not hit the top 5 reasons why people are opting for lethal drugs. It has everything to do with existential concerns like, I feel like a burden on my family. I feel like I've lost control of my bodily functions. I feel like I'm no longer dignified. And when those things, those kind of existential things about your personal self-worth and who you are weighing down on you, in addition to the possibility of excruciating pain, it's hard to suggest that, I think it's a hard argument to make that you're really making a cool, calm, collected, autonomous decision under these, under that kind of duress.
All right, last question. Assisted suicide, can you discuss it in the context of diminished mental capacity, including perhaps those with guardians to make healthcare decisions? Is this a cogent concern?
Oh yeah, for sure. So already proponents, they start with one thing and then they move you to all kinds of other things. So in any state where they've legalized here in the US and then in other jurisdictions like Canada and elsewhere, they start with kind of the baseline of what we see here in the US. So 6 months or less to live, it has to be a terminal condition, et cetera, and then they move away from that. And they do 3 things. They either make it easier, faster, or they include additional disabilities. If one of the things that they would like to include is dementia. But they're worried about that here. The proponents in the U.S. are worried about seeming like they've got some cognitive dissonance in their position. And so rather than saying, well, we want dementia patients to be able to get it, they're like, well, you should be able to choose this via advance directive. But the fact of the matter is in many states, including my own, there's case law or clear legislated law that says anyone without capacity has full access and right to the medical procedures that anyone with capacity has. So if I no longer have capacity and Jason's my proxy, and if we had assisted suicide legal in Massachusetts, which we don't, I get hit by a car, I'm no longer cognizant, he can make that decision for me, period, because of the case law in Massachusetts. And I don't know if that's the same here for sure, but it's certainly a concern given that some fringe of the proponents are already pushing for early stage dementia who are deemed able to still make decisions, being able to get access to lethal drugs because of dementia as the underlying condition. And you see many concerns coming out, even from the Washington Post. I know we just had a big media skew panel here, but the Washington Post, the editorial board of the Washington Post came out last week with an editorial saying, we think it's really, really bad that Canada's going to euthanize people with the underlying condition being mental health. We think that's bad. I can hear your inside voices saying even the Washington Post. Yes, even the Washington Post. Right? They're saying it's bad because Canada's not just thinking about doing it, they're doing it. They're helping people who have mental health disabilities. Think about this. Psychiatrists in the mental health context, the whole point is for them to stop people from killing themselves. And here they are saying okay, well, I'll help you kill yourself. And no, you're not quite depressed enough. You're not quite demented enough. Yeah, this is just this subjective doctor power moment where I'm going to go off the rails, but I just want to...
Give me that website again. Give me your organization's website one last time.
So you can get to us through PRAF.org. That's Paul Adam... Well, let me see here. Sorry, Paul Ralph Adam Frank.org.
All right, excellent.
Yeah.
And locally, you can check out nosuicideny.org for specific to the New York State legislation, nosuicideny.org. Would you show your appreciation for Matt Vallière?